The mop bucket squeaked across the polished marble floor of the corporate lobby, the kind of floor that reflected back every sharp light like it was ashamed of dust. Mark Hughes bent low, pressing his shoulder against the mop handle as if he were carrying more than just dirty water. He always cleaned with the same determination that he had once put into building cars in his father's garage or painting a room to make a rented house feel like home. But now, as a single dad with bills stacked higher than his courage, he worked nights as a janitor in Carter Knox, one of the most powerful financial firms in the city. At 42, Mark looked older than his age. His tired brown eyes carried shadows, and his rough hands told of work that never seemed to end. But his smile, when he thought of his daughter Emma, had a way of softening the hard edges of his life. She was 13, bright as spring sunshine, and the reason he hadn't given up when his wife walked out 3 years ago, unable to handle the constant grind of poverty. Mark had one rule for himself: never complain. The mop, the bucket, the empty coffee cups scattered across executives' tables, these were his battles. Silent ones. And silence had become his language. On this particular Friday morning, silence was shattered. "Stop right there!" a voice snapped. It belonged to one of the mid-level managers, a man named Greg Parsons, known for his expensive ties and louder-than-necessary presence. Greg's polished shoes clicked against the floor as he pointed a finger at Mark like a courtroom prosecutor. "What's wrong, sir?" Mark asked, pausing with the mop halfway in motion. Greg's face twisted into a smirk. "Don't answer me. I know what you've been doing." Heads turned. A group of employees passing by slowed down. Receptionists behind the sleek desk speaked up. Even the security guard shifted uneasily. Mark frowned. "I don't understand." Greg waved a folder in his hand. "The missing supply orders. Cleaning agents, paper towels, disposable gloves are all gone. Thousands of dollars worth. And who has direct access to them every night?" "You." The accusation hit Mark like a slap. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His chest tightened, not with guilt, but with the weight of how easily people believed the worst about janitors. "I would never." Greg cut him off, raising his voice louder, savoring the audience. "Save it. I've already reported this to upper management. Frankly, I'm surprised you lasted this long. Single dads are desperate, I get it. But stealing from the company, that's low, even for you." A hush fell. Mark felt dozens of eyes judging him, branding him. The word thief hung in the air like smoke. His instinct was to defend himself, to shout that he worked 2 jobs, that his daughter needed braces, that he'd rather collapse from exhaustion than steal. But instead, he stood silently, gripping the mop handle like a soldier holding ground. "Nothing to say?" Greg pressed. "Of course not." "Guilty as charged." It was in that very moment, while Mark's silence looked like defeat, that someone else noticed what no one else did. From the mezzanine above, CEO Catherine Carter had been watching. Catherine was not the kind of executive who paraded her power. Tall, composed, with a streak of gray in her otherwise raven black hair, she had built Carter Knox alongside her late father. Unlike her board members, who viewed janitors as shadows moving in the background, Catherine noticed everything. She watched Greg, enjoying his performance. She watched the employees, eager for gossip. But most importantly, she watched Mark the way he stood, silent, calm, not out of guilt but out of something harder to define, a kind of dignity that couldn't be rehearsed. Catherine narrowed her eyes. Something was off. She had been reviewing financial discrepancies for weeks. Small leaks in the company's million-dollar operations. But janitorial supplies? Those were pocket change compared to the missing sums she'd been trying to trace. And Greg Parsons was one of the men with clearance high enough to cover his tracks. She leaned against the railing of the mezzanine and spoke, her voice calm but commanding. "Enough." The single word cut through the air. Greg froze, Every head turned upward. Catherine descended the staircase with the grace of someone who had nothing to prove but everything to enforce. "Miss Carter," Greg stammered. "I was just addressing an issue of theft. I caught this janitor red-handed." "Red-handed?" Catherine's voice dripped with cool skepticism. "I see no evidence. Only you're shouting." Greg flushed. "The evidence is in the records. Supplies are missing." "And yet," Catherine said, stopping only a few feet from Mark, "our accounting department has uncovered financial anomalies far exceeding the value of janitorial stock." "Perhaps you'd care to explain those?" Greg's throat bobbed. "That's a broken bar unrelated." Mark stood silent, but his silence was no longer heavy with shame. It became something else, like a mirror reflecting truth back at the accuser. Catherine turned to him. "Mark, isn't it?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, Mom." "You've worked here how long?" "5 years." "Any complaints against you?" Mark hesitated, then shook his head. "None that I know of." Her eyes softened. She turned back to Greg. "Then before you brand loyal staff as criminals, I suggest you check your own accounts." A ripple moved through the crowd. The whispers exchanged glances, the beginning of doubt. Greg tried to recover, but his swagger faltered. "You can't accuse me without proof." "No," Catherine said evenly. "But perhaps it's time we find it." The words marked the turning point, because in the weeks that followed, as investigations unraveled, Mark's silent stand became the unlikely spark that revealed something far darker than missing supplies. Millions of dollars had been siphoned through fraudulent invoices, funneled quietly into offshore accounts. And at the center of it all stood Greg Parsons, the man who had tried to bury suspicion under the fragile dignity of a janitor's silence. Mark never sought revenge. He never asked for recognition. But what he gave that dire his refusal to lash out. His quiet strength in the face of public humiliation exposed more than one man's crime. It revealed a truth Catherine Carter could not ignore. Sometimes the most overlooked people held the clearest mirror to justice. And for Mark, a single dad who thought his life had already been written in tired ink, everything was about to change.